I think the human person is a complete unknown. There's a mystery to us. You can't sum somebody up and decide they said X, therefore I know everything about them.
That people really want the Bob Dylan mystique in this movie, and he really doesn't give it to them.
This movie beautifully dramatizes is that you can have the courage to say what you want to say.
What the story is showing by omission is that Bob Dylan came looking for something and it was gone before he got there.
So I passionately hate biopics, and I kind of liked it.
All right, well, we're here to talk the Bob Dylan movie, A Complete Unknown, and so I'm very excited to be talking to Tom Hoopes. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here again.
Tom is the host of The Extraordinary Story, a podcast about the life of Christ. He is the former editor of the National Catholic Register, writer in residence here at Benedictine College, and he plays a mean guitar. So I'm really happy that he's on the show.
No, I'm really excited about this podcast. I was really excited about this movie. I'm really excited about Bob Dylan. I'm really excited about talking to you right now, Michael.
Get less excited, please.
Okay.
You're kind of making me nervous. But I did want to ask, what are your, just to prove our Bob Dylan bona fides, give me 4 deep cut tracks that people might not have, off the beaten path Bob Dylan things.
Okay, so this is kind of a cheat because I play these for my kids all the time because it annoys them / I like them.
Okay.
One is All the Tired Horses, which is the opening track to Self-Portrait.
That's pretty good.
And that's a really great song. Very unusual song.
Mm-hmm.
Then Father of Night from New Morning, isn't that the album?
Yeah.
Some great songs. This is probably one of my favorite albums right there.
So underrated.
I really like Dirge from Planet Waves, which is he has 2, there's Planet Waves is an amazing album. It's got 2 tracks on it. One is the perfect I No Longer Love You song, and that's called Dirge. And there's one that's the perfect I Love You song that's called The Wedding Song. Mm-hmm. Also, Brownsville Girl, I think, is an amazing song that isn't listened to enough. That's on Knocked Up Loaded, which is a random 80s album that has some better stuff than you'd expect on it, actually.
Yeah. Okay, well, I actually haven't heard the last 2. I think if I had any deep cut tracks, I would say Blowing in the Wind, Times They Are Changing. Mm-hmm. I would say Like a Rolling Stone is a good one that people should check out. And maybe Dark Eyes on Empire Burlesque.
That's a great song.
Those are kind of my 3.
Those are very solid Bob Dylan songs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, well, so we're coming at this as huge Bob Dylan fans, both of us. So I just wanted to know, what were your expectations going in? What were your fears? What were your trepidations? And were they assuaged? Were they met?
Yeah. So I passionately hate biopics.
Yeah.
So for me, movies work by putting you in sort of a trance-like state, which is literally what psychologists can show, but also what Pope Pius XII, of all people, wrote something about the motion pictures. And he wasn't being negative about them. He just says that they affect you in a deeper way because you put your hopes and dreams onto the characters on the screen and you become them in a different way, a deeper way, a more psychological way. So that's what a great movie will make you forget where you are and forget what you're doing and enter the story. Biopics, I find that impossible because Anthony Hopkins is not Richard Nixon, right? The person on the screen, Joaquin Phoenix, is not Johnny Cash. So it's constantly, the image is constantly, there's this jarring thing reminding you. So it's like an irritant that irritates against the very thing which makes movies effective. Okay. So I was expecting to dislike the Bob Dylan biopic for that reason. And I kind of liked it. Actually, I was surprised by how much I liked it. As a matter of fact, I don't think it's a great film, but I think it's a really, really effective film.
I think I now, the more I think about it, the more I like it. When I saw the trailer and I saw Timothée Chalamet doing his Bob Dylan, I was a little worried. Singing voice, great, and that carries through the movie. The speaking voice, I was like, ooh, that's if he's gonna do that exactly that way for 2 hours, I'm a little nervous here. But I mean, the headline, of course, is that Timothée Chalamet is kind of great in this role. But for me, I think it's a really, really good movie. But I don't know if it's the best Bob Dylan movie, if that makes sense. I think it's a really good movie about an artist coming to terms with himself. But if the Bob Dylan that they portray in the movie, it's an interesting take, but it's not one that it's not the Bob Dylan that I recognize in the songs that he's written. So I think we both have complex feelings about the movie, Tom, but it is an amazing cinematic experience, I think. Like, I cannot wait to see it again. And I just wanted to ask you, like, what are some reasons that people should go to a theater to see this movie?
Oh, wow. Yeah, absolutely. I think they should. I think what's been talked about a lot, and I think it deserves it, is the set design and recreating a world that I was never around for, but that I really enjoy spending some time in. I think Timothée Chalamet has told the story about how this was initially supposed to be released or filmed in 2020, and then COVID hit. And what his original approach to the character was going to be to do as little research as possible and just kind of own the character his own way. And what he decided to do instead was spend a lot of time learning Bob Dylan. He said entering the Church of Bob, practicing playing guitar and harmonica like Bob Dylan, practicing singing like Bob Dylan. And oh my gosh, that paid off in spades. It's really well done. Comparing it to the Johnny Cash movie that the director also made, I think it's just night and day. I think that movie's fine and it's doing something different. But here you almost feel like you're watching a Dylan performance often.
Well, I mean, the live performance, it was an important part of Walk the Line, and it carries over into this, but I think even more so, like there's so many long takes where full like drama is just playing out in the course of a full song, and you don't have to do awkward takes to some other person's fingers doing the guitar. It's him and Ed Norton as Pete Seeger and Monica Barbaro as Joan Baez.
Yeah.
Man, they
recorded it all live, from what I understand. What you see them singing, that was the audio from that day at that performance, and that was great. I also like, I like and don't like, so the Johnny Cash movie has a flashback scene from Johnny Cash the boy and how that affects the story later on. And that's important, and it works for that movie. He comes into town a complete unknown. You don't see any flashbacks to his life growing up. There's I think it's just entirely linear, isn't it? No flashbacks at all.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and we can talk about that later. Yeah. He almost refuses. Don't look back. He don't look back.
That's right.
Like the Scorsese movie. But I mean, to your point about like the, I would recommend it for many of the same reasons. The world that it creates and the cinematography by Phaedon Papamichael, who's kind of unsung, even though he's been a pro for a long time. He talked about how he really wanted to film make the film in very, very, very deep focus so that you could see, every face in the crowd of these concert scenes and all the streets reaching back in New York. And I think it really pays off. It just fills out the atmosphere. And I think the atmosphere is the best part of this movie. And the supporting cast, which we'll talk about later, is just, the great thing about the film. From everyone from Scoot McNairy as Woody Guthrie to, like I said, Monica Barbaro, somehow doing Joan Baez, which is like, who can do Joan Baez but Joan Baez, And I think if you love music, especially if you love this kind of music, like this is a movie that with any of my reservations is going to play on at my house. I'll just throw it on in the background, I know, and just sort of like live in it. I mean, it's a really remarkable, it's almost like a concert film in a way. And like just moment after moment. So I thought with all the reservations we'll talk about, or that I'll talk about, it was like total magic as like a trip to the movies. We in the theater I saw it at, we there was an old man at the front, and he was in a wheelchair with an American flag posted to his wheelchair. And at the end, he was like, I was there for this whole this whole thing. And I was just like, that's amazing. And so it's kind of cool because I'm like a hipster who came to Bob Dylan and this era long after the era was over. But I think this movie, for all my cynicism that I might bring to it, is gonna really hit home for the people who were there and for a whole new generation of listeners. You know?
Yeah, I had a similar movie-going experience. I think I saw it in the same theater, but it was me, two sons.
Oh, you were the old man. I
was the old man.
I just wanted to clarify that.
And my sons enjoyed it, and I had the joy of sharing this with them. And in front of me was a guy I know from our church, actually. And he was there with his kids, one of whom is named Dylan. I thought, oh, I see why this youngster might be named Dylan. If you're here on opening night with me, even though it's Christmas. So it was great.
That's really cool. Okay, so let's get into everything, just absolutely everything about this movie.
Okay. Well, I like Bob Dylan's songs a great deal. I don't particularly care one way or another about Bob Dylan, the guy. I presume that if I met Bob Dylan, the guy, I don't know, I'd be disappointed or not, but I wouldn't have the experience I have listening to his music, because that's him at his best, sharing, thoughts that have been edited and put in a certain poetic form so I'm not expecting to love Bob Dylan, the guy. I like Bob Dylan's music.
Yeah, I guess my central thing about like why I say there could be a better Bob Dylan movie made. Not saying like I need to have a window into every song that he wrote. I don't need to see the scene where he saw like a man on the street with a tambourine and thought, oh, there's a song here. I guess what I'm saying is I hear a wit in his early stuff, like Who Killed Davy Moore, that I don't see in this characterization. I see like a sorrow in songs like It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, and those things are not present in this character. But the funny thing is, it's like maybe they weren't in his personality. It's tough to see it's tough to see like a portrayal of someone who created all these beautiful songs that covered like the whole spectrum of human emotion in a way, and you can't help but be disappointed by that. It's kind of like Shakespeare in Love. Like, to me, I see Shakespeare in Love and I'm like, this guy seems like an idiot. Like, how did this guy write Hamlet? And so I think that's where it's that grading thing that you're talking about with the biopic that I experienced a little bit. But at the same time, I think that's kind of what the movie's about. And that's why it's a good movie. It's about, that people really want the Bob Dylan mystique in this movie. And he really doesn't give it to them. You know what I mean? Well,
yeah, and that's what he did over and over again in his career. In fact, we're going to get to our own personal relationships with his music later. I'll just stick in with the movie here. I was really worried at the beginning of the movie. You start with Pete Seeger in a courtroom, speaking in a way that I can't imagine somebody would speak in a courtroom. The judge, the whole thing was blocked in a way that didn't ring true to me. He wanted to sing a song in the courtroom in a way that was cheesy. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a reenactment, almost like a museum reenactment. Like you're seeing an exhibit about Pete Seeger and they have some guy reenact it. I thought this is going to be really hard to watch. It took me a while for the movie to kind of win me back after that. But it eventually did, because it eventually showed you Bob Dylan. Once he kind of settled into himself, he became kind of a guy on the screen instead of a depiction of a guy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so I I actually liked the Pete Seeger scene because I liked every Pete Seeger scene in this movie. I thought Edward Norton knocked it out of the park. But that's part of like the building of the world. I was like, I think the world in this movie and the supporting cast in this movie are the things that really shine and the things that elevate this beyond your standard biopic. Just the detail and everything. But I want to ask Tom, like, what's your history with Bob Dylan?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sure. Well, okay. So I told you ahead of time I had a hot take on the movie.
Oh boy. Okay.
And I'll get to that. But I think my own interaction with Bob Dylan. So I was growing up, I was in high school in Tucson, Arizona. I suddenly heard music on the radio for the first time and thought, oh, this is awesome. I was kind of a brainy, nerdy kid, so I thought, okay, I'll have to read about this. So I got Rolling Stone magazine, started to read Rolling Stone magazine. I actually read it cover to cover for the interest in the articles. And so I was learning what you're supposed to think about music. And I kept hearing Bob Dylan's name or reading his name coming up again and again as this seminal figure kind of hovering in the background of popular music in the 80s, which is when I was growing up. So when the magazine said that this album called Biograph was coming out, is the first box set album of its kind that was followed by a Bruce Springsteen one and others. But it was all a bunch of Bob Dylan songs. I asked for it for my 16th birthday, got it. And what you did back then is you taped it and put your cassette tape into your Walkman and you listened to it constantly. So I listened to this thing constantly. And then I went out and bought every single one of his albums. And what they didn't tell you, or what I didn't understand was, okay, so the narrative of Bob Dylan that I got from Rolling Stone and from the liner notes of this album, which I also read several times, is that this is a guy who challenges conventions. People try to put him in a box, but he breaks out of the box. He is his own person. He gets to decide who he is. You don't get to decide who he is. And I saw him become a Christian and embrace Christianity. And I really liked those albums. And so I just thought of Bob Dylan embracing Christianity as, oh, this guy is so punk. This guy is so willing to stick it to the man that he chose Christ. And if you listen to those songs, they're very much like his protest songs. He's protesting against a society that over and over again says, you're not supposed to believe in Jesus. You're not supposed to you're supposed to be this other kind of person. So I embraced that rebel who was even willing to embrace Christ. And I was a non-practicing Catholic at the time. It didn't make me become a practicing Catholic, but it was an essential step toward faith in my life that eventually led to me embracing my faith and, becoming who I am now.
Yeah. Okay. That's fascinating. And when did you see like the, because he's been biblically steeped, like right from the outset. But I'd agree there is an evolution there about how he found Christianity, or how he embraced it finally. But I wonder how you see that. Do you see any of that manifest in this period of time, which is his folk era going into the electric era?
Well, so he started out with this deep kind of piety about American song tradition, which he has to this day. I mean, he talks about the old songs in America as kind of like the basis for your education if you're going to be a songwriter. And I think Woody Guthrie's mystique gave him the permission to even be a singer, because he doesn't have a voice like Harry Belafonte, who was popular at the time, or like Frankie Valli or whatever. But he has a voice kind of like Woody Guthrie's. So
a little bit, yeah.
He was able to make that his inroad into the folk music, his inroad into the music scene. And folk music is just steeped with lots of biblical songs. On his first album, there's Gospel Plow, there's Man of Constant Sorrow, there's See That My Grave Is Kept Clean, there's Fixin' to Die with deep religious themes. So if you look at his three most Christian albums, it would be 2 from his Christian period and his first album, really, right?
Yeah. Even though there's only, I think, one original track on that album.
Yeah, but he's recording songs about Jesus and dying in his good graces. So I think he's discovering it through the music. And that's how I discovered it, through his music.
So I kind of discovered him through a love of that folk music, and it just kind of dovetailed with my movie love, and actually my discovery of Martin Scorsese, because Martin Scorsese covered this same period in an amazing 4-hour documentary called No Direction Home. And I think if anyone likes this movie, they should treat themselves to that film, because it's going to fill in a lot of the cracks and a lot of the things that were going on in the folk scene, including like the work of John Jacob Niles and other off the wall singers that were influencing Bob Dylan at the time. I think the interesting take that this movie has, though, is that this Bob Dylan doesn't seem that interested in folk, really. The one in this movie seems to be saying that he was actually the most cynical when it appeared that he was being his most sincere and pure songwriting self. Even after he recorded that album of folk tracks, I mean, he went on and did 2 or 3 albums that were just full of his own music, but still followed and elevated that tradition. And that's why Pete Seeger really like latches onto him as a possible new messiah for the folk movement, for the Newport Folk Festival. But do you agree, first of all, can you see what I'm saying, that the movie thinks Bob Dylan is insincere?
Well,
and do you think he was insincere?
So I think that he clearly made up his own life story. He was presenting a false Bob Dylan to the world. I mean, down to the very fact that he was calling himself Bob Dylan when he grew up Robert Zimmerman in northern Minnesota. So I think the movie's onto something there. He's creating himself, and if you look at his career one way, he's creating himself over and over and over again. Or if you look at it another way, he's finding different musical vehicles in which to share his thoughts with the world. He's definitely a folk fan. You see, even later in his career, he puts out a couple folk cover albums. So it's something that carried through. So I want to get to my hot take.
Oh my gosh. All right. Here we go. Hot take.
All right. So I think this movie is particularly hitting in a certain way at the end of this election year, because it's saying something extremely important that we're in the midst of rediscovering as a society. Now, and this is my Harrison Butker leads to a complete unknown take, okay? So Harrison Butker, as you know, spoke on our campus at commencement, and this speech unexpectedly went viral in a way like nothing that's ever hit our school, and like my friends in DC say, rarely hits anything. Right?
I mean, behind the scenes, like as the guy who filmed the speech, it was which is an interesting thing on my CV now. But behind the scenes, it was a real whirlwind here, and it began horribly negative, and that was the first wave of reaction, and then suddenly we were swept up in positivity and support for the college, and it was a fascinating moment to be in the middle of.
I don't want to get into the particulars of the speech.
Sure.
I learned the hard way that that's a no-win proposition. But what I do think is important, and this is something President Minnis has said over and over again, is that you had this guy stand up and say things that he believed in that you're not supposed to say, but said them anyway, okay? And I remember I did an article right away about it before it went viral, and I focused on the things I thought would be least controversial. And that was what he said about mothers and fathers being true to their families. And that turned out to be what was the controversial thing, which was a big surprise to me. But I think the case could be made that the Butker speech started a whole wave of a year in which suddenly people were saying things that you're not supposed to say. You're not supposed to vote outside of your identity. You're not supposed to just all these pieties, all this political correctness that you're not allowed to say anything different from, suddenly was off the table, and you were allowed to say stuff. You were allowed to just breathe and be who you say, what you want to say, and not be accused of being a bigot necessarily for believing what you believe about whatever it is. Okay?
Yeah.
And even now I'm avoiding saying anything because there's still this pall of
it's a 20-minute speech,
oppression.
and you can't make a blanket response to the whole thing because he talks about so many different things in that speech. But I think it's interesting you're talking about it. You're talking about courage. Go ahead.
Well, but this movie is exactly about that. It's about a guy who so there's a commercial element that's telling him to do a certain thing, and that's that nobody wants to hear a 21-year-old's songs, so you have to sing the old songs. In fact, he walked off of Ed Sullivan's show because Ed Sullivan wasn't going to let him sing his own song, but was asking him to sing a different song after initially agreeing that he'd sing his own song. Anyway, then he has to face the folk crowd, these people who have welcomed him in, and say, look, I want to say different things. I want to be able to say what I say. It's like it's a free speech movie in a way. Why can't I just express who I am and what I feel for real? Why do I have to constantly have second guess myself and self-correct what I think in order to meet your expectations of what you want me to say? Let me just say what I want to say. That's what Bob Dylan meant for me in my life as I discovered my faith in a world that, doesn't embrace you. It certainly didn't in the 80s or 90s or even now, for embracing your faith. That's what Bob Dylan meant for me. And that's what this movie beautifully dramatizes, is that you can have the courage to say what you want to say. And I think that's exactly what Dylan did when he entered the folk scene and wrote his own songs. I think that's what he did when he went electric. I think that's what he did when he went Christian. I think that's what he is doing to this day with his with his musical choices.
Yeah, and I know. Look, I mean, this is a scorching hot take, and the fact that we have a wooden table here is making me kind of nervous. But but what you're talking about, because a naysayer could say, about both Harrison Butker and Bob Dylan, how much courage does it take to do something when you have a large bank account? When you have a lot of money in your bank account, which both of them did at the time when they made this switch. But it takes courage to take on a different public identity. It's almost like you're starting over, Bob Dylan took on a new identity and spoke. Bob Dylan actually did not speak to a crowd that he expected to be kind or receptive to what he was doing when he went electric and played Like a Rolling Stone in Maggie's Farm at the Newport Folk Festival. But it did take courage to do that, even if it was because, who wants to be hated by any number of people, And Harrison Butker, even though he was at the college, a Catholic college, knew that he was going to, that he knew that he was talking to the wider world when he made the speech, and so I think there's something to what you're saying here. It's
well, thank you, Michael.
Yeah, well,
that's big coming from you.
Well, it's the speech has given me the courage to say that I filmed the speech in a way. That's a big step for me. Okay. I mean, look, it is on my Letterboxd bio, but and it does filming the speech. I mean, look, it's a pretty good shot. If I do say so. I mean, it's pretty good.
It's an awesome shot.
It has Benedictine College framed, in it. That's so. I'm not saying that I was looking at the golden ratio consciously while I was
because you're such a master.
Well, it was kind of innate. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I don't want to be too I want to exercise a little humility here, but
your humility is inspiring for me right now.
But I think getting back to the movie itself, the only thing I would say about the portrayal of his courage is that I don't see enough of the man behind the myth to understand what he's doing on first viewing. I think all of what you're saying, this transformation of a character, is there. Getting back to Bob Dylan and Complete Unknown, it's there, but it's there by omission. It's there in the things that are not shown, because in his early days, you don't see him get jazzed about writing a song until he starts writing in his Electric period, or really his bringing it all back home and into Highway 61 Revisited period. Before that, he's knocking off like masterpieces left and right, Blowing in the Winds, Times They Are Changing. It's like a mountain, a clear mountain spring coming out of like a dirty faucet or something. It's like, how is this happening? It's almost like an Amistad, Mozart being a goofy like moron, and Salieri's watching him from afar being like, how can this idiot be making these amazing things? But that makes it difficult to really grasp onto the to the decision he's making on first viewing. You're really watching him. Most of the emotion is coming from Pete Seeger as his mentor. His sort of, he wants to be his father figure, but maybe Bob Dylan never saw him that way. From Monica Barbaro giving an astonishing performance as Joan Baez. I'm actually kind of shocked she hasn't been recognized more in her work. And even Elle Fanning, playing kind of a thankless role, does very well.
Yeah, I have in my notes that she seems to be doing a great job, but my gosh, the lines she's getting are terrible.
Oh man. Okay, so let's get into spoilers there, because the funny thing is, spoiling such an iconic moment in history is funny, but there are spoilers. So the moment, like the second time that she goes to the Newport Festival and has almost the exact same arc where she's like, I'm realizing that that I can't be part of this, was just like, it was like syrup to me. It was like calling back to the movie Now Voyager that they saw on a date. And I was just like, wow, this is thankless.
Yeah, there were touches in the movie that were very artificial that kind of wrecked it. So so that was one. And I did in my notes, I said, she's very good at looking jealous and hurt. So maybe they figured, hey, let's do more jealous and hurt takes. Yeah. But they constructed the story such that the love story arc and the music story arc would both climax at the same moment. Which wasn't true. He wrote Boots of Spanish Leather about his split, and other songs about his split with her way earlier in his career.
Interesting.
But then they did the thing where the day after the big blow up at the Newport Festival, he drives by the stage on his motorcycle and stares wistfully at the stage, and then drives over to Woody Guthrie and has a final moment with him. It's almost like The Lord of the Rings, where okay, the movie ended, and you keep going to new ending points of this movie.
I liked all those endings really, but futzing with the timeline with this kind of thing. I know I've been kind of pedantic on this show recently when we're talking about Mary and we're talking about Conclave, but it's really just what's the goal of the movie, and it's to show you who is the person Bob Dylan and what was this moment about, and the funny thing is, it's so this is from the director of Walk the Line, who made the Johnny Cash story into a love story. That was his take on it. It's about Johnny Cash and June Carter falling in love, and also the relationship that Johnny Cash destroys on the way too, his wife. Well,
and his relationship with his father.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this, interestingly, is kind of a series of unrequited love stories, and most of them are directed at Bob Dylan. Joan Baez, Ed Norton as Pete Seeger, Elle Fanning. They're all just kind of in awe of this guy who says like really sweet things, like, Joan Baez, she's pretty and she sings pretty, and then throws in a bit of acid, where it's like, but
maybe too pretty.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can just see it on their faces of like, I'm kind of like here, I'm repelled, but I'm drawn into, and I can't look away. And to me, he was more, maybe it's because I've just watched Nosferatu recently, but he seemed like a vampire in their lives. They just like invite him in and he just kind of sucks them dry. And he even, to me, just is so pale and gaunt and a little bit humorless in his performance, I thought, in the first part of the film. But it's really, I think the other unrequited love story, though, is that is revealed by the end is Bob Dylan chasing Woody Guthrie. And it's really because I think what the story is showing by omission is that Bob Dylan came looking for something and it was gone before he got there. You know, it's a very powerful thing to see Woody Guthrie, the voice of a nation and the voice of the people, have no voice by the time that he shows up. And it's kind of a, I think what we might be seeing there is kind of a mourning period for Bob Dylan. And
it's funny, he's the first voice you hear, Woody Guthrie. You hear the song even while they're still showing the production companies.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And then the next voice you hear is Pete Seeger. So Dylan's the third voice you hear. You see him hitching into New York, a complete unknown. And he remains a complete unknown at the end of the movie. You don't learn that he's from Minnesota. Well, I guess you maybe through secondhand exposition.
Yeah. But there's not the moment where it's like baby Bob Dylan and he's like, I'm going to be the best guitar player ever or something.
Right. He provides a little bit of his own exposition in the car after he goes to the hospital for the first time, talking about how much he liked Little Richard and Buddy Holly. So you learn that this is a rock and roll guy. Bob Dylan, he thought that his contribution to folk music was he brought a rock and roll attitude toward folk songs. And I think you can really see that. I mean, it went from the very melodious, very kind of reverenced take on folk songs to his kind of angry, biting, kind of snarling take on folk songs.
Yeah. And I think... I mean, continuing like the theme of mapped out by omission, this movie is also coming out. For movie fans will know that Walk the Line, this director's film, inspired one of probably the last great parody movie, which is Walk Hard. I don't know if you've seen this, Tom. If you do,
I haven't seen the whole thing.
I think you would love it as someone who hates biopics. As someone who hates biopics, I think you would absolutely love it because it kills them stone dead. And it's a pretty it's an overly raunchy movie sometimes, but it's also just brilliant. So take that as you will. But but he is avoiding a lot of the pitfalls there by having some of Bob Dylan's best songs, like "Girl from the North Country," having been written before he even arrives on the scene, you know, and it's about a woman who we don't see. It's not setting up that it was about Joan Baez. But if I may, one interesting thing that this movie does is that it kind of, by having the songs just kind of exist and having almost no moments of kind of ridiculous, I'll write about, I saw a leaf blowing in the wind, I'll write about that. It kind of allows his songs in the musical sense to function for him the same way the songs function for us. Like when he sings It Ain't Me, Babe with Joan Baez, you know, she's picked this song that he's written and she says it's an appropriate song for, you know, this moment in our relationship, and they're singing it together. And it's kind of cool to see, oh wow, this artist is like, it's almost like he's listening to a song he wrote that he didn't even realize was describing a moment that he would find later in the future. I think that's interesting as a music biopic, that you're not seeing that everything's like explained.
Yeah, they tried to pick songs that would be story appropriate. So when they push him to be commercial and he's recording, he sings "Fixin' to Die." He sings, and this was really true. He really did this in his life. He sang an acoustic set at his Newport Folk Festival and then an electric set. The acoustic set ended with "It's All Over Now, Baby Blue," which is his farewell to folk songs, if you want to think of it that way. Then he opened his electric set with "I Ain't Gonna Work on Maggie's Farm No More," which is another symbolic take on him kicking over the folk establishment. the movie had some nice little touches for people who have followed the history. So there's this big, it was for a while rumored that Pete Seeger had literally cut the electric cord with an axe.
Yeah.
Which didn't happen. But so they show the electric cord and they show a bunch of axes for some reason on the set. And they show Pete Seeger kind of looking at them and looking at the cord, which you wouldn't get if you didn't know that history, but it's kind of a nice little kind of wink to people who do. And there's a lot of nice things like that in the movie.
The way it ends is a nod to the Bob Dylan legend as well, because Bob Dylan famously had a motorcycle accident in, I think, 1966. And that took him off the touring scene for a long time. In fact, there's some people who wonder if it was even that bad, if he just used it as an excuse to take time off and to disappear. But the movie has him riding off on his motorcycle and cuts to black. I suppose it could be right before the moment that he whiffs, that he crashes supposedly. Right. And it
ends sort of like the Inside Llewyn Davis movie, where your folk singer lead, who's not making it, he hears Bob Dylan's voice as he goes out into the alleyway and gets beat up. So it's just kind of telling you that, okay, whatever stage we're at now, it's going to get worse off screen.
Yeah, that's the other movie this film is created in the wake of, is Inside Llewyn Davis. If anyone likes the musical performances and the world this is creating, I think that's another great movie to watch.
It's a brutal movie in terms of its themes, and it's
an incredible, because it's about someone who just doesn't have it in them to be Bob Dylan, and fate just will not allow him to ascend to a certain level. But on the opposite end, one cool thing about this movie is, I think if we're looking at, if we're buying what the movie is saying, which is that Bob Dylan was incredibly cynical and only became sincere when he started breaking away from his folk period. What I think is that you see him grow as a human being. It's the irony to me as a viewer is when he puts up the wall to the public with the glasses and the cigarette and everything. To me, that's when I see the human being come out. That's when I finally see a sense of humor. I see him smile genuinely. I see him feel obligation and guilt, which is why he shows up on Pete Seeger's public access show, late granted, and why he plays the acoustic set after just sort of blowing up the Newport Film Festival with his electric set. I think it shows someone who created a messiah aura for themselves by myth making, and becomes, bogged down by the messiah that they created for themselves, that this complex, and wants to wipe that away.
I think he would. I think the movie and Bob Dylan would both argue that he created it for himself. He was a guy who came along and wrote a lot of great songs, and then other people put the Messiah thing on him, and him not liking that is the story of the movie and moving away from that.
I mean, it's there's different interpretations there, but I'm trying to find the humanity in a great performance. But one that I think was missing a little bit of humanity, I felt. And initially, maybe I just felt so bad for the people who wanted him to like connect with him. But look, I'm a Bob Dylan fan. I can't this is just me. Like, there's no way that this movie could be everything that I need it to be, because I go with expectations, but yeah, I don't know.
So, and I think another great byproduct of the movie will be that a lot more people will listen to Bob Dylan and discover him.
Absolutely.
And if you like Taylor Swift's eras, this guy has just decade after decade of eras. I mean, what she's done is truly remarkable. That I appreciate what Taylor Swift has done.
Ironically, you're the number one Taylor Swift guy on campus.
Well, in one article, in 1 week on our website, media.benedictine.edu, I had a Taylor Swift article and a Bob Dylan article about this movie. But he just has era after era after era. And I think what he is he's an artist who's trying to express what he's seen in the world. And I read the article because he's says in that article, it's actually a quote with his close friend who said, he talks about this all the time. He never thought of himself as a Messiah. He never wanted to be the voice of a generation. He realized that what he had was a gift from God that was extraordinary, precisely from God, that he had to be the steward of and bring it to the world. And so I think that explains a lot of him dodging the fame and dodging the adulation, because he's like, I got this ability to do this and I'm just going to do it. And I like you to leave me alone when I'm not doing it,
Yeah. And look, I'm just the eras of Bob Dylan, the eras of Taylor Swift, I'm just looking forward. I want to see what Harrison Butker's Christmas in the Heart era is like,
Wow. It's all coming together, isn't it? You've got Harrison Butker, who's on the team with Travis Kelce, who is the boyfriend, possibly engaged, possibly soon to be engaged with Taylor Swift.
Yes.
And here it's Christmas time, and Bob Dylan wrote A Christmas in the Heart.
It's almost like
Did you just get goosebumps? I just got goosebumps.
Oh, you have the benefit of not having a T-shirt, so you can hide your Look, as thank you, Tom.
Okay,
go ahead.
I want to. So I'll do that. We can take this out, but I want to do my
keep it in.
Blowing in the Wind.
Are you going to sing it?
No, I'm going to give
Tom's
my Blowing in the Wind theory.
Just so everyone knows, he's an excellent songwriter. Go ahead.
Here's my Blowing in the Wind theory.
Okay.
How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? And there's guys.
5.
There's guys who can't walk.
Okay.
So 0, right? How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? 0, right? How many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? I think he's saying 0. The answer, my friend, is Blowing in the Wind. It's 0 to all those questions. Next one. How many years must a mountain exist before it's washed to the sea? Many, many, many. How many years must people exist before they're allowed to be free? Unfortunately, many, many, many. How many times can a man turn his head and pretend he's cannot see? Unfortunately, many, many, many.
And
many?
Our fearless leader.
And then, how many times does a man look out before he sees the sky? That's 1. Mm-hmm. How many ears must he have to hear people cry? 1. And how many deaths will it take to be known that too many people have died? See how the answers are right there?
Here's the problem.
We can take this out.
No. Here's the problem, though. The answers to those questions are 6, 3, 17, 4, 955, 14, 8, 0. You were kind of right about that one. And 1, you were right about that one too. And then 2.
Okay, well, there goes my whole theory.
So, I have an article coming out about it soon. But,
okay.
So
we can take it out.
No, we're gonna keep it in, and we're gonna do it. Let's just do it again.
Yeah, let's do that.
Look, Tom, I think Bob Dylan remains a complete unknown, and I think I know you now less than I did. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so that the movie is called A Complete Unknown. Mm-hmm. He drifts into the town, a complete unknown, mm-hmm. and then he drives at the end out of town on his motorcycle, a complete unknown.
Totally.
So I think the title is well chosen.
I do too.
No Direction Home is a different line from the same song. Mm-hmm. I think this is a better title.
No, I think for the movies that they constructed, it's the perfect title. Then you have I'm Not There too. I mean,
but the thing
song. Is, I think in some ways I think it could be a bit of a cop-out to just be like, we can't know the person, you know, or a person can't be known. I would just like to see, here's the thing. When I see Bob Dylan in an interview, I see a guy who has to suppress smiling. And I do not get that sense with Timothée Chalamet's performance, or for any performance I've seen of Bob Dylan, even Cate Blanchett doing her excellent turn as a quote unquote Bob Dylan in I'm Not There. I don't know. I think it's like great news. We have a really fantastic movie that I want to watch again and again and again for its musical performances and for the sort of story of an artist. But I still just don't think that it's the definitive take on this artist. But it is so much better than it had any right to be, because you could get this bad. You could get it really wrong. Do you think that this is the definitive Bob Dylan movie? No,
not at all. But like I told you before we started taping, I think I'd give it a solid B, possibly a B plus, because I think what Chalamet did with his performance kind of broke through a little bit and did more with it than I expected him to do. But B plus at best.
Excellent.
But it's really enjoyable. I recommend watching it. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it makes me think of Harrison Butker, because it's an excellent way to kick off the new year.
Well, okay, so.
Oh my gosh. One more thing. Go ahead.
I think the human person is a complete unknown. There's a mystery to us. You can't sum somebody up and decide they said X, therefore I know everything about them. I think you want to preserve the mystery of a person. I think we're allowed to be mysterious. I think we're allowed to be who we are without somebody having to categorize us into a certain understanding of what we must be because we said X, Y, or Z. And I think that's a point that the movie's trying to make. I think that's a point that Bob Dylan's existence makes. He's not trying to make it as a point. It's just who he is. And I think it's a point that needs to be made now more than ever, when anything you say in a cancel culture will be held against you and you'll be defined by that thing. We are each a complete unknown, allowed to say what we want to say and be who we are without being shut down by the rest of society.
Tom Hoopes, thanks for coming on the podcast.
This is my last time.
Can't end. No, I was trying to end on a high note. This has been the Catholic Film Club, and my name is Michael Coy. This was Tom Hoopes, giving some brilliant and hot, blinding takes. It was just like Tom Hoopes' blues, just like the song, and this podcast is brought to you by the Center for Catholic Media at Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas. Thank you so much, and God bless.